Brett Heath, our Director of Emergency Management, also the Director of Public Works. And he's the guy that runs this whole place here. So we're very fortunate that Brett supports this program, allows us to use the facility. And
okay, thanks Bruce. Hello everyone. How you doing? Good. You looking forward to a bunch of dry material tonight? Okay. Well, I heard Bruce's comment about questions, so you don't have too high of a bar because I'm going to set a real low one. So any questions? You can ask anything, almost anything you want. So I have some handouts. If you want me to just pass these around on some of the material I'm going to cover tonight, because it's a little different than what's going to be in your book. Let's see, so last week you had some fun, you were outside, right?
Yeah.
Okay, lifting stuff. How'd that go? Cool. Cool. And we had fun doing that work. So we got a couple of things on the agenda tonight. I think Bruce mentioned them already. We're going to start with protection of emergency workers. So we're just going to kind of run through a few things that are under the, we have in Washington State and nationally for emergency worker protection. Any attorneys in the room? No attorneys? Okay, sir. Not that I don't like attorneys. My brother's an attorney. We're good. Attorneys are great. Okay. All right. So protection for emergency workers. We've got a couple of things that we're going to go over here. Bruce mentioned the Good Samaritan Act. That's the Washington State. It's in the RCW, Vice Code of Washington. We have aiding a police officer. We'll cover that briefly. We'll talk about Washington State emergency workers and kind of how that program works, because that's one of the main programs that if you're working for an event and you're part of a broader organization, that's one of the main pieces that you would be you would fall under the authority of the emergency workers, RCW, and there's also a Washington Administrative Code of WAC on that. The Volunteer Protection Act of 1997, that's federal, so there's some federal regulations out there to watch your back as well. And then I'll just wrap up with real briefly what the protection is and the advantages to being an Issaquah volunteer. So there's some things that go along if you decide to become an Issaquah volunteer. You're not required to. I want to make that clear up front. This is, CERT is, some of you are here to find out how to be prepared and take care of yourself and your family, and that's great. Others, if you want to get more involved, you can, all the way up to and including working with the city or other organizations during events. So during training events, during exercises, there's just a number of different things, ways that you can be involved. And the level of your involvement is your choice. So I'm going to kind of present the whole range, and you can decide from there. So that's what we're going to be talking about. And you've all heard of the OSHA cowboy, probably, right? This is the OSHA bull rider. So bull bar, they're ready to go. All right, so here we go, jumping into the fun stuff. So the Good Samaritan Act, RCW 424, it's basically providing liability protection for you if you are providing a service, emergency service, free of charge to another individual. So if you expect to get paid, or you are being paid, you're not covered under the Good Samaritan Act. But if you are just volunteering your services to someone else in need, then we fall under the Good Samaritan Act. Now, I should say, since there's no attorneys in the room, I can say whatever I want, I guess. I should say that these are defenses. That doesn't mean somebody wouldn't try and file a claim against you, but you have these defenses in place, and typically that means that it's not going to go anywhere. So just a heads up. Anytime you're trying to help somebody and something goes wrong, everybody gets named in the lawsuit. So heads up on that. So anyway, that's kind of the bottom line on this one. Emergency medical services or volunteer. It's not limited to emergency medical services. It can be involved in transporting as well. Bottom line is you're not liable for civil damages. Now, there's a caveat. There's a caveat to the 1997 Federal Protection Act as well. Actually, there's caveats on everything, right? And the caveat here is you're not doing something you weren't trained to do and you're not supposed to do. So if you're doing something willfully wrong and you know it, if you're trying to do tracheotomies and you haven't been trained in that, that would get you into trouble. So that's what this, they all have these statements about omissions constituting gross negligent or willful or wanton misconduct. As long as you're not doing things you're not, you shouldn't be doing, you're covered under this act.
Brett,
Yes?
I'm hoping this is intelligent enough. Have there been very many lawsuits on against volunteers? Is that very common or is it not very common?
I don't think that's very common at all. And like I said, these are affirmative defenses if they are, which is why I don't make any comments on it. If you're an attorney, you're not going to take it.
We're in a country where people like to do that.
We do. We are. Very much so. Which is why it's really nice to have the Good Samaritan Act protecting you as well as the federal act for the emergency workers. So Good Samaritan is easy to sum up. It's any person, including a volunteer, rendering emergency or medical services, and that includes transporting people. You're not compensated. That's the catcher. You can't be compensated for what you're doing. You're not doing something you're not supposed to do. You're not liable. So that kind of sums up the Good Samaritan Act. Okay. Aiding a police officer. So this is another Washington State Revised Code of Washington 901. You can look these up if you'd like. So citizen immunity for aiding a police officer. Basically, this one boils down to, these are all in your handouts too. So boils down to if the officer is in imminent danger and needs help, then you can help, or if the officer requests help. So those are really the caveats on that one. Imminent danger or they request your assistance. And if that's the case, you get...
Are there two handouts?
Are there two handouts? Yeah, there were two handouts. There should have been a one yet.
Right here on the table.
You talk all around. Oh, that's not a problem. I probably should have started those one at a time instead of together. Okay. But under this particular act, you have the same civil and criminal immunity that the officer does. So, good act if you're helping out a police officer, you see a police officer in trouble, they can't help themselves, or you, or they ask for your help. Good one, there's a summary for it, private citizens aiding a law officer, you've been asked, it's under emergency conditions, you're doing it in good faith, you've got the same protection the police officer does. So that's kind of nice. Frosty was trying to get away. Run for it. Okay, now this one's a little bit more involved. And this is the Emergency Worker Act. So I'm going to go through this because, again, if you're doing something, if you're doing anything other than, I shouldn't say anything, but if you are involved with emergency management in any way, with an organization, if you're working for the city of Issaquah or one of the other cities around here, maybe official emergency management organizations, then this applies to you. So if you decide to become a registered emergency worker, then this is the act that you actually register under. So there's an RCW, talks about it, just defines what an emergency worker is. This is the important piece of it, local emergency management organization. So if you're not involved with a local emergency management organization, you're not, by definition, an emergency worker. And it means you're also not covered under the benefits that go along with this system. So you have, for registered emergency workers, we issue cards. Brenda does that. You've all probably met Brenda. And so she issues the cards. and you're engaged in activities that we have said, yes, those are activities that you should be involved in. Yes?
Does that go down to the level of if you are an Issaquah emergency worker, CERT type person, and you help out in Redmond just because something's happened, you just happen to be there and they're assembling their certs, does that mean your Issaquah cert is not covered helping Redmond?
So if you went to Redmond and Redmond had an event, then you would be covered under Redmond's emergency management. So you're responding to Redmond at that point. So, and there's provisions for doing temporary registration and things like that. So, and or the state of Washington actually issues the mission numbers. So like on the 530 slide, the OSO slide, there were a lot of certs involved in that response, and they were covered under the emergency mission number that the state issued. So that's the nice thing, is that it's about statewide. But yeah, you may be deployed, depends on which organization you went through to be deployed. As long as it's one of the, if you just show up on your own, you're not covered. But if you go in part of an actual deployment, the city of Issaquah helped out in 530, a lot of the other cities around here did as well. So you're all part of that organization at that point. So it's emergency disaster related incidents, which includes training missions. But the bottom line is it needs to be something that's been approved by the local emergency management organization. It requires the use of emergency workers. And here's the big deal. It's got a mission number. The mission numbers are given by the state of Washington. So once that mission number is issued, then this becomes effective. There's 18 classes of emergency workers. Generally speaking, CERT's going to fall under what we call the general category, so it's kind of the catch-all for anything that's not specific. You can see there's some very specific ones in here. Aviation, if any of you are pilots. Communications, we have a Issaquah communication support team, so they're registered as communications emergency workers. If you're an engineer and you want to volunteer your services for that, those are the engineering and fire service. Here's the general. This is the catch-all, and CERT would be in there. Hazmat, law, mass care, we do sheltering, we have done sheltering, and CERT's work on our shelter team, both general population and pets. So if you're interested in that, that's available. Medical, there is the Medical Reserve Corps in Issaquah, and also King County has a very large Medical Reserve Corps. So that's available. Public ed, I don't know if any of you are into radiological stuff. Search and rescue. There's been a number of certs that have gone into search and rescue after they've gone through the CERT course. Supply, training, transportation, if you're a diver, and then there's utility work. So those are the major categories of the classes of emergency workers. It's WAC 118. You're wondering, you're sitting around at night, 9 o'clock, what can I do? Go to your website, go to the Washington website, pull up WAC 118 and start reading. Yeah. So I kind of talked about this already. This is a general classification of what it includes. The bottom line is, it's just got a bunch of duties and talks about the general nature. It doesn't have any specific training or qualifications. Participation is essential for specific emergency, etc. So, typically, these persons shall register as temporary emergency workers for the period of time they are participating in activities. So that's available as a temporary emergency worker. You don't have to be, you can say, well, I don't want to be a registered emergency worker. During an event, you change your mind and say, well, I want to be involved in what's going on. You just sign you up as a temporary emergency worker at that point. Same benefits, just a little different process. Temporary registration. This just talks about kind of how you go about doing that, filling out the registration forms. You get the temporary identification card. Sometimes these are issued, sometimes not. Depends on how long the event is lasting. Longer term event, you get a registration card. Otherwise, we just have the sign form. Then again, you're under the you're reporting to it under the control of the emergency management organization. Let's see. So there's a couple of forms. There's EMD 078 and there's MD 24 as well. But again, just ways of checking in. It basically says who you are, and you were here, and how long you were on duty. And that's important because if something happens to you, there's a claims process under the Emergency Workers Act. So that's why the registration and all the other things that go along with it. Registration, again, you got to be registered if you want to be protected. Yeah, it takes a pound of flesh now, 2 pounds of flesh. So if you indicate, this is for permanent, well, not permanent, what we call registered emergency workers, which is temporary emergency workers. You know, which category, which one of those 18 classifications you want to fit into. You need to go through a criminal background check, and that's administered through the city, and then you get an emergency worker identification card, which Brenda will issue. So you get the hard card you can hang around your neck. It's official. Okay. Worker duty status. You're on duty when you're performing work that's part of the mission. It's been authorized by the Emergency Management Division. We put that in, that's always in bold, because if you're doing something that's not authorized, you're not covered. It's got to be part of the mission. And you're in the direction and control of an authorized official. In this particular case, that would be me. No event shall public agency, that just talks about what public agencies are. Responsibilities, you need to know what the rules are. So, and if you're not able to perform the assignment, you need to tell somebody. So if you're not comfortable doing it, or you're not qualified, or for some other reason you shouldn't be doing that, then you got to say so. This one should be obvious, but in Washington it's getting more blurred all the time. You got to show up sober and not under the influence. A valid driver's license is required if you're going to be driving vehicles. If you're not going to be doing that, then it's not going to be required. Liability insurance is required if you're using a personal vehicle. It's required in Washington State anyway, so hopefully you all got liability insurance in the driving. Responsibilities. Here's the traffic regulations. This is common sense stuff, right? Comply with requirements of the authorized official. Inform on-scene command, ICS, whether or not you fit the duty to check in. Those are basic responsibilities. Now there is a claims process under this. Interestingly enough, it's very convoluted, but it does exist. It's kind of a long process. If it's over if your injury is over $2,500, it has to go through a local medical board, and there's a whole bunch of stuff to do. But you don't use L&I, and you don't submit through L&I, because this is a separate process from what the ministry says. There's a medical form, maybe before, there's a property form if your car gets wrecked or something else happens while you're in the on duty and in the performance of your duties. You need to notify the officer right away, and then I have to notify the state and start the process. So this is the 078 form that we mentioned earlier, which is just your name, your assignment, date in, date out type stuff. So it's keeping track of who you are and when you were working. 24, this is the registration card. These are the old cards that were used. The information is still very relevant, but this is just what's used for filling out if you want to be a registered emergency worker to collect that information. All right, so sum that one up. You got to be working for an emergency management organization. You got to be registered with the organization, and if you meet those qualifications, then you have the benefits under RCW 38. Any questions on Washington State emergency workers? No questions?
Oh, I'll ask one.
Oh,
I
okay.
gotta set the bar low.
Okay. I hope I have an answer.
Are there any restrictions in regards to becoming an emergency worker? Emergency worker?
As long as you pass the background check. So that would be, as far as restrictions go, that's going to be the restriction. So if you can't pass the background check, then it's interesting. The Red Cross does national background checks. We do Washington State background checks. So there's a couple. If you want to do mass care and work for Red Cross, it's national.
And that's the same background check that we go through, like I volunteered at my kid's school. When I did that, I had to fill out the form that goes to the Washington State Patrol.
Washington State Patrol. Yeah.
Same guy.
Was there another question? Yes.
In the case of emergency, say like earthquake, how many expected workers would you think could come for this? Emergency workers, how many roughly?
Well, okay, so you get a lot of, we have a cadre of registered workers. It's around 50-ish. And then we expect a number of, we always get quite a few CERTs coming out that are not registered workers, but they come out as temporary emergency workers. So we get that during floods and other events. During a large event, when you have a lot of damage, you can literally end up with hundreds of spontaneous volunteers. If we get an event where you're looking at a lot of spontaneous volunteers, not registered, we don't know anything about them, then we set up a volunteer registration center and we try and capture that information and work with them. You're always, and that's kind of what they did at OSO, because a lot of, I mean, the initial response was with the people that lived there. And they stayed for the entire duration. So what they did was they just incorporated them into the response. It took a little while to catch up to that. So they're already out there doing their stuff, and you come along and say, okay, what's your name? And so you start recording that, so you know who's on site if somebody gets hurt. And it also helps because all of those volunteer hours, if there's a presidential declaration for disaster, all of those volunteer hours count as part of the local match. So FEMA reimburses at 75% of your actual cost. The state usually pays 12.5%, and that leaves the local agencies picking up 12.5%. Your volunteer cost isn't the right term. The dollar value of your volunteer hours go against that 12.5%. If you have a big, long-lasting event, you've got a lot of volunteers working, or even 2012 wind and ice storm that we had here, we had a lot of CERT hours put in on that, and we were able to use that as part of our match. So it's a good deal. It protects you. It also helps out the organization. But it can be challenging to manage volunteers initially. You really don't manage volunteers initially because everybody's out trying to help and doing what they can do. And if it's short term, that's one thing. If it's a longer term thing like 530 slide was, or earthquake recovery, big earthquake recovery, then we're going to want to try and get everybody into the system. Good questions. Anything else? I like those questions. Those were great. All right. Volunteer Protection Act of 1977. So this is the federal act I was talking about. So this is across around the nation. Gives you liability protection again for volunteers, as long as you're volunteering for a nonprofit organization or a government entity, you're not liable for harm. And of course, there's the caveats. Same basic caveats that you had with regards to the Good Samaritan Act. You didn't do something, you didn't cause harm because you were doing something you weren't supposed to be doing. You acted properly. It's pretty much the same. The other qualification that talks about in this one specifically is if you're you're not flying aircraft, if you don't have an aircraft license, so You're not operating large vessels if you don't have a permit to do so, so that's specifically spelled out in here. Those are your typical caveats.
Shouldn't that be and? Or
Where are we at?
possess an operator's license or maintain insurance?
Yeah, you're right, it should be. Thank you. So, again, for the 1997 nonprofit, you're working for a nonprofit or a government agency, you're acting within the scope of your responsibilities, you're licensed, you're authorized, you're not doing something reckless, and you're not operating without a license, then you're not liable for harm. Using common sense, you're doing the right stuff, right? Okay, and then last, we are at the end. So Issaquah volunteer. So if you choose to become a volunteer with Issaquah, registered emergency worker, then these are kind of the check boxes here. Issaquah volunteer registration form. You pass the criminal history background check. You get issued an ID. You're then a registered emergency worker. You need to record and report your hours. You need to track those. The nice thing is your liability insurance is covered under Issaquah's now. So as long as you're doing something that we asked you to do, if you're an Issaquah volunteer and you've gone through this process, Issaquah now covers you for liability as well as all those other things. So follow Issaquah's defense. Personal injury, that's the emergency worker piece of it. So if you get personally injured, then it goes back, kicks back to the emergency worker. So you're not on our medical, just on our liability. Okay. All right, any questions about that? Okay, good. We're off to a great start. That takes care of protection for disaster protection for emergency workers. So let me switch screens here real quick. We will jump into the next one. Oh. Yeah, Bruce changed remotes on his own little buttons. There we go. Okay, the unit you've all been waiting for. How many of you have a car kit? Oh, good. How many of you have a kid at home? Okay.
And the car's parked at home.
How many cars parked at home? I like that, actually. That's not a bad answer. Because, your car kind of goes where you go. If you got a kit in your car, you're 80% of the way there. I've got a kit in the car. I've got a kit in all my cars, and I have a kid at home. And how many of you have more than 3 days worth of food? Anybody? A couple of you. Okay, good. Good. Yeah. Good. We used to store, a bunch of dried stuff, pastas and rice and beans. And actually, I still have those. I found rice and beans works great for training on the backpack. You can just, they come in different sized bags and just stack them in it. And if you get lost in the woods, you'll never go hungry. But freeze-dried is also a great way to go. They've got freeze-dried stuff up now. You can buy in bulk, and it's good for like up to 25 years depending on what you buy. And we actually use it here in the city. We've got a stash of it. And it's not bad. So it's not as good as when you're in the woods eating it, but it's still not bad. Everything tastes good in the woods. So car kits. Car kits are important. How high of a priority do you think these folks are for rescue? They're not way up on the list because they're high and dry, and they got their car, and they've got some shelter, so they'll get rescued eventually. This is I-5 down by Chenelas. So they'll eventually get rescued, but it's not going to be. They're not as high on the list as the folks that are sitting on top of their roof, trying to stay dry. So car kits are important. All right. So things we're going to talk about tonight, the CERT organization, or the decision-making piece of it, the incident command system. So in your books and the materials that you have, it kind of goes through CERT incident command from the perspective of just a CERT organization. And what I'm going to do is give you about a 30,000-foot overview of the incident command system as it's used nationally and how we use it here in Issaquah and where CERTs fit into that system. So you'll get a feel for the system and how you would use it. I mean, you can use it as a group of CERTs, but it's really a much bigger system. It's intended for much bigger operations, and I want you to kind of have a bit of a feel when you go away tonight of where, as a CERT, you would fit into that if you decided to come out and help out during a flooding event or work at a shelter or something along those lines. So that's what we're going to talk about. It's an overview. Because I'm going to spend, I don't know, an hour maybe on it, and you know, it's a series of 4 classes, a couple of which last 3 days apiece. So that's why I said it's a 30,000-foot overview. We're kind of going to hit the high spots and the important pieces. We're going to talk about CERT forms, and I'll talk about how that works with the ICS forms. CERT's the latest version of what you have is much closer to the ICS forms, which is a good thing than the original CERT program was. But it's good for you to know how to use those CERT forms, because if you go somewhere else that is not as ICS intensive as we are, or you're doing strictly a CERT drill during the, what do they call that, Bruce, the CERT Expo? Yeah, so there's a big annual drill of CERTs kind of in the region, and they kind of run through a bunch of things, and typically they're going to be using the CERT forms. We'll talk real briefly about mobilization, and then there's a test at the end. You have to pass the test. Okay? All right. So first thing we're going to talk about in this unit is a little bit about what you learned about last week. All right? So, quick review. What do we do if we have heavy damage?
Work it off and report it.
Okay.
Don't
Go in. Yeah, you secure the perimeter, basically. Not going to go in that building. How about moderate damage? What do you do if you got moderate damage?
triage, immediate treatment, removal, or advice.
Right? Minimize rescuer's time in the building. Who's the most important person? You are, right. And the next most important person is?
My wife.
Okay, all right.
My dog.
Right, your wife or your buddy? Or your husband? Yeah, whoever's with you. Okay, light damage. You got light damage, what can you do with light damage building?
Triage and triage.
Yeah. Take advantage of that. If you got a lightly damaged building or not much damage at all, you don't need to haul people out into a night like tonight if it's nice and dry inside, right? Gotta get you out of the building. Thanks a lot. Now I'm all wet and cold. Top photo, what kind of damage does that look like? Heavy damage, yeah, I would agree. How about the bottom photo? What do you think? Light damage? See anything wrong with that? How about you guys see this right here? Know what that is? Any guesses?
Cement walls.
It's a concrete block wall, yeah. But what do you think that is?
Big crack.
Essentially, it's the attachment for the second floor inside the building.
Oh.
So when you're looking at buildings and doing your size up, those are some things to keep in mind. It might look, that looks like it's probably not really damaged, right? Until you start looking close. And so this area, the rest of the building might be in good shape, and you might be able to have light damage in other areas, but this area could be heavily damaged inside. I certainly wouldn't want to be working underneath that floor. So, we've got a lot of tilt-ups in the area. Tilt-ups, the older tilt-ups don't have very good connections, so they're kind of prone to going in an earthquake. Walls go out, roof comes down.
Is there any Washington law that modern standards?
It varies by jurisdiction to some degree, and it's usually based on the extent of a remodel. So if you don't do anything to your building, I'm not aware of anything in Washington that says you have to bring it up to code. But if you do work on it, and that work exceeds, typically it's a percentage of the dollar value of the building, then that triggers an upgrade in a number of areas, fire and other areas. Okay, good, all right. Pass test number 1. All right, what's one way to remove debris and get access to trapped victims? Okay. Oh, I'm pushing the wrong button. There we go. All right, never knew. And how do you move a victim with suspected spinal injuries?
On a door, backward, improvise backwards.
Yep, someplace where you want to keep them stable, right? Don't let that head move. That takes a lot of teamwork. You guys have done medical already, right? Okay, so you practice kind of rolling people around and having 3 of you move somebody. It's really, everybody has to pay attention and be in sync on that, otherwise you go, so, head doesn't move with the body, you got a problem. All right, so let's talk a little bit about on-scene management. Why is on-scene management important?
Safety.
Organization.
Good. Organization, safety, efficiency.
Documentation.
Okay. Communication. Yep. Good. So here's some of the things. We want to maintain safety. We talked about that. Clear leadership. Who's in charge, right? You need to know who you're reporting to and who your supervisor is, who's in charge of the incident, and then to improve effectiveness of rescue orders. We heard all of those. So good job. Get past that one. You don't have to dwell on that. All right, so on-scene management, well-defined management structure. Again, that's your chain of command. We'll talk briefly about that. Well, actually, we'll talk quite a bit about when we get into this. Span of control, we're going to spend some time on a few minutes talking about span of control and what that looks like and how that works in the ICS system. Common terminologies, effective and integrated communications, which basically means that's a long way of saying your communications work, right? You've got a way of communicating with each other. So almost always fails when you're during an event or an exercise. One of the big things that happens is communications don't work as planned. Either because people don't talk and don't share things, or and we saw that with I think it was the Dallas Ebola case, right? The guy went to the hospital, got sent home, and the right people didn't get told when he was there the first time around. So we didn't make the right decision the first time. So effective communications are important. Consolidated action plans. We're going to talk a little bit about MBOs, but ICS is basically all about management by objective. So those of you that have been around a while have probably remember the old MBOs from, when was it? That was the big management thing in the 80s, if I remember right. By objective. Still works. It's very effective for taking care of responding to events. Comprehensive resource management, that being effective with what you got and making sure you've got an accountability system. Okay, so objectives, not to be confused with ICS objectives, which we'll cover in a minute. But I try to kind of think of a nice, catchy little way to present this, right? You've all heard of R2D2, or at least, sometimes I'm getting up there in age. And sometimes I mention things with my crew and I forget that some of them are like 20 and they haven't ever heard of F fruit or Gilligan's Island or something. I get these looks like, what are you talking about? Anyway, so Star Wars. So we have P2D2 here. So 2 Ps, what's the problem and what's our plan? And then our 2 Ds is deploy resources and document what you did. So P2D2. Hopefully that will be a little easy for you to remember. Problem, plan, deploy, and document. Problem, plan, deploy, and document. And the other piece that kind of goes in here is you're always looping back to the problem and making sure that you're addressing the right problem. Because problems the situations change, the events evolve, and if you are just focused on what you started doing, you might be missing what's now happening. So always remember to keep sizing up, keep doing that resizing. We have, I forgot to put it on the slide, I was going to do that, but in the back here we have what's called the operational planning P. And the planning P is what, it really kind of just lays out the clockwork and what happens during the ICS process. So the bottom leg of the P is the initial response, the things you go through as you initially respond to it. And then you'll see it basically just turns into a circle. And that circle is getting the plans together, making sure you've got the resources together, and then adjusting, doing your tactics, and then reevaluating the situation, and then going through that whole planning cycle again. So during an event, well, shows a good example, that's what they were doing. Initially 24 hours a day, and then it turned into 12-hour plus 14, 16 hours, as long as they had daylight and light up there to work. They were running the planning P all the time. So every day there's a new set of MBOs that come out. It says, here's what we're going to do for this day. These are our objectives. So that's the planning P. If you want to take over those multi-day courses, you can dig deep into that. Okay. So bottom line is, this is what we're trying to do, and we organize it under the incident command system. CERT teams, you got to have a leader, right? So now last week you were out. What were you guys working with last week?
We had one of the steel plates.
Okay, good. Those are fun.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you were using plywood or steel. If you were using the steel plate, you kind of figured out you got to work together, right? And somebody's got to be a leader. And if you're in charge, take charge. If you're not in charge, let the other person lead and be a good follower. So those are some real basic principles. But if you're going to be a leader, be the leader. If you're not going to be the leader, then follow who is the leader. If you're not comfortable being a leader, say so. Hand it off to somebody else. Not everybody wants to be the leader, and that's perfectly fine. It's all about teamwork. So, and again, this kind of boils down to ICS, just make sure that we're following the chain of command, and everybody knows who they're reporting to, and they know who the leader are. That's what's really important. They direct the team efforts, and they document the activities. Unless delegated, which we'll get into at ICS. Okay, so that's the CERT stuff. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about the actual ICS system and how it works. Is anybody here familiar with it, worked with in ICS? Yeah? Where were you working site fire? Well, you've got this down. You can probably teach the course then.
I'm here to help.
Okay, great. Yeah, Eastside Fire. So ICS, Incident Command System, came from, basically started in California back in the 70s for fighting wildland fires. So they were having these big wildland fires. You get a lot of agencies, Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service, Department of Natural Resources, local fire departments. You get all of these agencies trying to work together to combat a wildfire, and if you don't have some organizational structure that they can all fit into and work with, you've got a mess, right? So they came up with this incident command system. It's evolved a little bit over the years, but it's still fairly close to, it has a lot of the same principles it did back then. FEMA, following 9/11, and with the National Incident Management System, they said, hey, that's a great system they're using out there with fire agencies, and fire agencies were early adopters of this because, well, they had to be because they're fighting fires, right? If you're going to be deployed to one of these wildland fires, you got to know the system, and they discovered it was very effective. So, just even in local response, fire departments have been using it for a long time. Feds came along and said, hey, we're going to start the National Incident Management System, and y'all are going to use ICS, which was great because now you have a national standard. You can go anywhere in the nation, and everybody understands how the system works. It's interesting because fire is very team-oriented, right? We all work together to put the fire out. Law enforcement's on the other side of that, the opposite of that. The cop is expected to handle everything that he comes in contact with, and usually fairly quickly. So ICS, on the law enforcement side, is taking a little bit longer. I'm in public works, we're kind of in the middle. So fire was first, we took a look at it, and hey, that makes sense, we should be doing that as well. So adopted incident command. For the most part, it's fairly well taken hold around the country. I'll tell you enough of that. So what is it? It's you may remember this for the quiz. It's a flexible organization model designed to provide a structure for response to an incident. So we'll see as we go through it what they mean by flexible organizational model. So this is what it looks like. So I'm going to show you this up front, and we're going to kind of talk about how it works, and you'll see this chart again in a couple different places. But I wanted to just real quickly, so in CERT, you are familiar with the term incident commander, right? What's the incident commander do? Leads. The incident commander is responsible for everything until they delegate it. Okay? So if you haven't delegated anything and you're the incident commander, it's all yours. All of these other positions are here so you can delegate and maintain your span of control, which we'll talk a little bit more about. All right, so you got incident command, safety liaison, information officers up here to help the incident commander. You have 4 sections here. It's not in order, but easy way to remember those are FLOP: finance, logistics, operations, and planning. So you got the FLOP. You got this is called the general staff in here, and these are section chiefs. So operations section chief, planning chief, logs chief, and finance admin chief. So, and then underneath here, underneath the operations branch, what do you think goes on the operations side?
Field work.
Yeah, that's all the field stuff that's going on here. What's going on over here? Yeah, you're right. Yep. It's the support for this side of the house, right? If you think of the military, you've got a guy on the ground, and there's, depending on what's going on, 5 to 7 people supporting him behind the scenes. So, guys on the ground, support operation. Okay. If you have a small incident, I hate to say that. But suppose you have a fire at your house and it's small, you get your fire extinguisher out and put it out. You're the incident commander, the safety officer, the information officer. If your neighbors come over and say, what was going on? You're the operations section. You were probably the single resource that responded, right? So you're all of that stuff on a small incident. And then, of course, this can grow up to several thousand people for large wildfires. I don't remember how many people were on 530, but there was a lot. So quite a few people on there. Yes?
One of the most common errors in the incident command system was trying to fill all those positions when they're not needed. I remember very vividly that happening to us when we really embraced it.
Yeah.
It created more problems than it solved.
We'll talk about that. That's a good one. I'm glad you brought that up. So just some principles. Agency autonomy. Again, you've got a bunch of different agencies working together. Same situation up at 530. There were 117 agencies that went through the EOC, and I think 167-ish that were involved all together, not including all the volunteers. So a lot of people from all over the state of Washington were involved in that, and outside the state. There were teams that came in from California and a couple of other states. So you've got to have a way of maintaining your agency autonomy. It's all MBOs. Talked about that. Unit integrity and functional clarity. You know who you're reporting to, and you can keep track of people. The functional clarity part is it's the same. Everything is called the same thing all the time, and there's job descriptions that go with those functions. Okay, so what do you think the incident objectives might be for the incident command system? Anybody want to take a stab at that?
Safety's gonna be first.
Okay, what kind of safety?
Personal safety. Life safety.
Rescue.
Okay. Okay. That was the exact one I was looking for. Yep. Yep. Safety is always number one. You got to do what you're going to do. Safety. That's safety for the organization. But the priority, when you're setting priorities on what's the organization going to do, life saving is the first one. What's the second one?
Containment?
Good. I call it incident stabilization. Contain it. Yeah. And then what would be the third? You guys are good. All right. You all passed. Very good. Yeah, you might see this again later on. But these don't change. So if you're ever wondering, gee, I'm an incident commander, what am I supposed to do? Is there any life saving to do? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, that's your priority. If it's no, you can move down here to instant stabilization. And why is instant stabilization or containment important?
I want it to continue to grow.
Yeah, you don't exactly. If you ignore this, you can find yourself right back up here, trying to do more of this. So stabilization is very important. Okay. If you ever wondered what the chain of command looks like, this is it. You can say, yes, I know what the chain of command looks like. All right. So if you're all familiar with organizational charts, you know who reports to who. That's what the chain of command is. And it's important because without the chain of command, it breaks down. What's really important about this, though, is that it doesn't prevent the sharing of information. So people have to share information across ways as well as up and down in the organization. So there's informal as well as formal as well as informal communication within the organization. Handle it right way. All right. So unity of command is, again, you know who you're reporting to. You're reporting to one person, and you know who's reporting to you. If you find yourself with more than one boss in ICS, it's broken. You should never have more than one boss. Anybody have more than one boss at work? That's fun, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Common terminology. Why would common terminology be important? Anybody want to take, what did I hear? I heard some answers.
So we can understand, everyone can understand what you're talking about.
Exactly.
Minimize communication link.
Yeah. So what does an EMT mean?
Emergency medicine practitioners.
Really?
Mechanical tubing.
Exactly right. That was good. Thank you. I love that. That was a great setup. So this is why, plain English, trying to limit the use of acronyms. Actually, acronyms were outlawed under NIMS. But wouldn't you know it? Somebody asked me this in the class. Said, I thought you said you weren't supposed to use acronyms like NIMS. Yeah. So we just use them because they're easier to say. But it can be a problem if you're going into an organization and you don't know that somebody, an EMT means an emergency medical technician. You better clarify that before you start using the acronym. Right? So it means a whole bunch of things. One of my favorite ones, of course, is El Monte, California. My most favorite is the email money transfer. There's my email address. Okay, so if you want to transfer some money to me, I made it easy for you. So anyway, common terminology, that's real important. Organizational functions, we'll get into that, but incident facilities, they have common names. The resource descriptions, we use type and kind, so what type of equipment is it, and what kind of equipment is it, and what type is it. So kind might be like a bulldozer, and the type is type 1 through type 4, it depends on what size it is. The smaller the number, the bigger the equipment. Type 1 is always bigger than type 4. Sometimes you gotta wonder why that is. Government. Yeah. You decided one comes first. Yes. All right. Communication principles. These are basic principles you probably learned in kindergarten or first grade. Right? You explain, say what you mean, ask when you don't understand, one person giving and taking direction, acknowledge the speaker, repeat directions, report in when your assignment is complete. Those are all, you know, this doesn't work just for ICS. This works well at home and in work relationships. Practice this every day, and when an emergency happens, you'll be good to go. All right. Span of control. Why do we care about span of control? What is span of control?
How many people report to an individual?
Yep. How many people are reporting to you? So why is that important?
If it's too many, you just can't deal with it.
Yeah, so how many people, those of you that have gone through studies,
5 to 7.
3 to 7. And, wait for it, there it goes. Wait. Oh. 5 is the ideal, right? Okay. Yeah, that was real technology back in the day. Okay? So, I guess probably pretty lame now. Now they're coming up with some better animation. Anyway, yeah, 3 to 7, 5's ideal. That's just based on studies that said that's about how many you can effectively manage. And that's going to vary. So if you're running a hazmat operation, 7 is probably an awful lot. You're probably going to want to keep it down on the lower end. If you're running something that's fairly routine, you can probably easily handle 7 people if they're, you know, confident in what they're doing. And it's not a complex job. So what we do, in order to, remember that big chart we had up here with all those positions on it? In order to control this span, manage the span of control, we add and remove modules as needed. So we insert management levels.
I have a question about that.
Yes.
So last season was at the cribbing. You
Yes.
had a comment that sometimes there might be 12 people to do something. So if I'm in a team of 5 people and we run out with another team, do you like defer to the one leader? Like does one leader defer to another leader? How does it work?
Yeah, you're going to have to. You can't have 2 leaders. Yeah. So if you're both doing the same job, the same type of work, and you're in the same area, you need one leader for that. Now, if you've got 12 people around, that's when you start thinking about, I might want somebody in charge of safety. As you start filling some of those other positions, I might want somebody in charge of documentation. So you can start delegating some of the work and making sure that all of the bases are being covered. Because, you know, 12 is getting to be, that's a handful. So you're talking about now building the structure in order to manage that. When it's 5 of you or 6 of you, that's one person's span of control. 12, you've exceeded that. If you find yourself managing 12 people, you can, a light should go off and say, wait a minute, I need to get this number down to 7 or less somehow. So in the command post, we talked about common terminology and functional clarity. So we have some things called in the incident facilities. These are always called the same thing, and they always do the same thing. So we have a command post. Guess who's in the command post? Yeah, the incident commander. The incident commander's in the command post. So wherever the incident commander is at, that's usually the command post. There's a base of operations. That's where all of that stuff on the right-hand side of the chart, the planning, the logistics, and finance, that's where all that happens is base. You might hear the terms emergency operations center. That's could be happening there as well. That could be your base. Camps, these are typically used in fire operations where you've got a base and you've got remote places for feeding and sleeping, but they don't have all of the other planning, finance, logistics operations going on. So just kind of, we're taking care of your personnel. Staging area, this is important. I noticed in your books it kind of talks about checking in at the staging area. Maybe, we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into forms, but staging areas are ready resources, and if you're not checked in, you're not ready. So only ready, and when you're coming off of a job, you don't go back into staging. you're coming back to rehab, refresh, eat, sleep, whatever it is you're going to do. And then when you're ready again, you go back into staging. But the only resources that are ever in staging are resources that are ready to deploy. So, Helibase and those are, you know, if you get to play with the big fun stuff, you get those. Okay, incident commanders, right? So first person on the scene is the IC. The IC establishes the command post, and you get to name it. Since you're the incident commander, you get to name the incident command post. That's your claim to fame. Tom here mentioned, you go by Thomas or Tom? Tom. So Tom here mentioned earlier about building the organization from the top down and what a mess that can make. You build the organization from the top up. Bottom up. The ICS position is always filled, so you're always going to have an incident commander. But after the incident commander, then you start at the bottom and you start saying, you start delegating the work. So, you know, somebody's going to go under cribbing. You know, somebody's going to be running the bar. Somebody's going to be putting the jacks under. Somebody's going to pull Jose out from underneath the steel plate, right? And you're not going to add any of those overhead pieces, any of those other things in the structure until your span of control exceeds 7. Or if you're uncomfortable with it at 5, you might put those in at 5. So you'll have to make that call, but you want to try and keep from going over 7. But you're building it from the bottom up. If you build it from the top down, you're going to find out the incident commander has nothing to do.
And working in the fire department, you know, the first unit on the scene usually consists of 3 guys, 3 people. And so that is what you build everything else from. So that helps you remember, for this example, if you can think of your fire department first engine, then a second, and a third, and whatever other resources come in, and just keep building from the bottom up.
Because your objective is what? You want to save lives, stabilize the property, and prevent property damage, right? Well, you can't do that. The management overhead pieces don't do that. Pieces that do the work are the ones at the bottom of the organization. The rest of it is just all about maintaining span of control. Let's see. Command can be transferred, but it's got to be through a formal process. I can't tell you how many, not usually too many actual events, although it does happen once in a while, but exercises, it happens all the time. Somebody will, so you've got something going on, and it's not the chief that's there, and then all of a sudden the chief shows up, and everybody thinks the chief's in charge. The chief's not in charge until a transfer of command is taking place. Okay? So. And the chief might not want to be in charge. The chief might just be walking through to see how things are going and has something else to do.
Boots on the ground don't want the chief to be in charge.
Yeah. There's a reason for that. What are you doing here? What Wes is always, what was it? Something about the fire will keep going as long as the white shirts are there? Something along that line. Anyway, well that was on tape, wasn't it? Sorry, Wes. Okay, so you guys want to take a little break? Why don't we take a little break? Let's take Candy back at 5 o'clock.
Get back into
Okay, we'll start a minute early. Everybody's back. forgot what I was gonna say about this slide. I know it's something really important. Other than, this is the, we're gonna talk about the operations piece. So just kind of some of the structure, that how things can be structured over the operations side, because this is really where the action happens and typically where you'll find yourself. So, mentioned earlier, you've got command staff up here, you've got your general staff in the middle, manning the flock, and then we have, under the operations section, we have branches, divisions, groups, strike teams, task forces, and single resources. So, I don't usually get to play with their branches. I wish we had some, but we don't do that. You gotta be the big boys. So, as I mentioned earlier, this is where the work's getting done. So after you have your instant commander in place, you start putting your single resources together. Most of you are a single resource. Some of you might be a married resource. Could be a part of a task force, and a task force is mixed resources, so that could be people with different skills doing different parts of the job. Or a strike team. Strike team is the same kind of resource. A typical strike team is used in the fire service, where you have 5 fire engines makes up a strike team. So one fire, you order one strike team, you get 5 fire engines, 3 people per fire engine, you got 15 people showing up. So. And strike teams are real handy if you've got you need a lot of the same kind of resource. Task forces are real common in my world, because we're doing a bunch of different type of work, clearing roads and working with PSE on down power lines and all that kind of fun stuff that happens during storms. And then single resources, that's just assigning a, and that could be a team. The single resource could be a small team, but or one person for the task. So, bottom line is, this is where the work's getting done. So, instant commander, and then you start with your resources. So, there's the structure again on the operations side. Command, what's the commander called? Okay, this is the commander, right? Command staff. These are the titles. This is part of that functional clarity piece. Things are always called the same thing wherever you are. Command staff, they're officers, safety officers, liaison officers, public information officers. Sections, anybody want to take a stab at what they're called? Chiefs? I heard chief. Yep, section chiefs. That's your operations section chief, planning section, logs, and finance admin. Branches, they're called directors. So if you've got a branch level, if somebody's a director, they're always at the branch level. That's the nice thing about this system is, so-and-so's a director. Well, you know they're running a branch. And you know a branch is right below a section. It's always structured that way. Then you start getting into these down here. Anybody got an idea what a group supervisor is called? Right, supervisor. Thought about trying to change that up, but that's good. Okay. Strike teams. What do you think the title for that is? The leader? Leader. I said, yeah. Strike teams, task force, single resources. You have leaders for all of those. So in your materials there, it talks a lot about leaders, team leaders. That's what's going on down there. Now, interestingly enough, what do you think the person running the division is called? Exactly. So supervisor, and then strike team, task force, and single resources. So you can see you've got kind of this redundant thing going on with groups and divisions. The difference here is groups are functional, divisions are geographical. So when we do snow operations in Issaquah, we have 2 divisions, one north of I-90 and one south of I-90. And then we have our resources under those divisions. We may also develop into something else, a bigger event, and we may have some groups as well, and they can move within the division. So that's, again, this is overhead. So your supervisor is overhead, your division supervisor is overhead, your branch director is overhead, your section chief is overhead. These all got added, or they get added, to maintain your span of control. Otherwise, you don't put them in. So what happens if you're an incident command and you stick a section chief in here, you now don't, you're not running any of this. The section chief is. So if it's a small incident, you can go home. Although you can't do that, because incident commander position always has to be filled, but you might want to just give it to the, promote the guy under you. CERT teams typically are going to fit in right there. May be part of a task force, but generally part of as just a single resource. Any questions on that? Okay, so here's a piece out of your book. This is a quiz. See anything that makes you think, I wonder if that's right? There's actually two things that can focus on that.
So why is the staging area where you have under?
That's one.
Yeah.
The staging area isn't going to be down underneath the roof either. No. I'll give you a hint. The problem's up at this level. See anything there that doesn't look right? What we just talked about?
Supervisor.
Yep. So really fun to correct the speed.
Gotcha.
Yep, got the fit. All right. So anyway, that's just out of your book. So this is if you had a CERT, if you had something going on and you had a CERT incident command, and you had CERT teams underneath it, how many CERTs could you have with this particular structure? How many people are involved there?
50.
Yeah, sure. How many's on each team?
7. Plus the team lead, so 8.
8.
And then
Yeah. 8 because the team leader can supervise 7. Right? Good. Good. Yeah. So you've got 56, and then you've got an incident commander makes 57. So, but you can see, how effective this is because that's just, one small organization, and you're managing 57 people. Part of a bigger organization, so you can have a CERT group, and again, same kind of structure under the CERT group where CERTs maybe have particular assignments, and they're getting their assignments from the CERT group. Usually we don't do it that way. I mean, that's a possibility, but normally one of these groups is going to be functional, like sandbagging or mass care or something like that, and you would be part of that team. So there wouldn't be a separate CERT group per se. You're just as a resource, as a volunteer, you're on that team doing that work. Okay. This is kind of more common. So the incident commander, we've got different types of resources here. We have the debris task force and shelter task force, and CERTs are on those task force helping out with the situation. So during the 2012 windstorm, the ice storm that we had a big cleanup operation over at Tibbetts Valley Park for all of the debris that was created, and that was run by the CERTs. So that worked out really well. Same with shelter. Okay, so what's that saying? I don't expect you to read this. I just threw this up because this is Issaquah's incident management team. So in the city of Issaquah, we have a Type 4 incident management team. Type 1 is the big national teams. Type 2 is the state teams. 3 is the regional, Seattle Metro and Northwest teams. And so we've got a Type 4 team. We're Type 4 because Type 3 is big. And we're not as big as Seattle Metro area. So Anyway, we have some positions that, with people that are filled and trained in those different positions. And if you're interested, after you've been through this training, and if you want to be a registered volunteer and kind of go through all the process, you can also be part of that team as well. So that's out there. I mentioned earlier that in the windstorm, we had the CERT team working the debris. So that's just the structure that was used for that. Okay, so over here on the support side, this stuff takes place, this is all in the field, this is field operations. This is the support operations that are going on for it. So in the planning section, we've got situation, which is kind of like, well, what happened, what's going on, what is the situation, right? We need to share that, we need to collect that information, get the intelligence, get it back out to the people that need to know, and share it with our local county and state partners. Resources, these people manage all the resources for this side of the house. Documentation does just that, takes care of the documentation. Demob, they're planning on the demob. Demob's important. If you've got a big operation going, you want to demob the food guys right away. They're going to be one of the last people to leave, right? Because you got to keep feeding people until everybody's gone. So demob planning is really important. Tech specialists, those are like weather engineers, fire behavior people. Logistics, what's logistics do?
Takes care of
Planning.
It doesn't do planning. No. What's it do? Did you say feed us?
Take care of
One of the things they
Food.
supplies, housing.
have. Yeah. So if you think of logistics, typically logistics is getting stuff. So they also take care of some in-house things like under the services branch, there's communications, so they're taking care of all the radio communications for the team, whatever kind of communications, not just radio. They're making sure everybody's fed. They're taking care of the teams. This is the team's medical, not the injured, not the victims. Support branch takes care of all the facilities, which we mentioned earlier, supplies and ground support. So they're making sure that all of this stuff keeps running. That's their job in logistics. Finance, well, you know what finance does, right? Keeps track of time, contracts, makes sure people are paid, and takes care of claims. So, kind of reminders. So you can use this, you can use ICS for not just disasters, but for planned events, like weddings. So, is the finance chief for the wedding?
It could be disaster.
Could be a disaster. Hope not. So, but the basic structure is here, because if you've got a big event, big family event going on, you've got to have food, right? You've got to have the facilities taken care of. That's logistics stuff. You got to buy the supplies. Somebody's got to pay for it all. You're going to have to figure out. You might have to get some tech specialists. You're going to want to know what the situation is as it unfolds, it develops, right? So there's a lot of things, and then the operations actually getting the facility set up and making the event happen. So you can use this incident command at pretty much any level. So next time your family's going to plan a big event, barbecue, you can appoint the flop. And,
So in a wedding, would it be Bridezilla would be the incident commander?
Certainly
Probably.
the finance man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Logistics and finance need to work real close together. So, anyway, I know in your book it talks a lot about setting up and running kind of a planning section, and you've got your logistics section. When you're working on a bigger event, it's not just a certain thing. This all happens in here in the Emergency Operations Center, which is normally this group. And then it's supporting everything that's happening. So typically, you don't have to worry about this, because you're going to be down here if you're involved with us or another government agency. All right, working with the media. How many of you have made records off the record statements to the media? How many of you know there's no such thing as an off the record statement to the media? Yeah. So That's a great one. Well, off the record, right. We have public information officer, the city of Issaquah has one. If you're dealing again with just something in your neighborhood and there's no other agency involved, and you've got somebody that can deal with the media, you want to appoint that public information officer so that they can make sure that information that gets released is the right information, has been vetted, which is difficult to do in today's world with Twitter and Facebook and just all the text messaging. It's a real challenge for our PIOs that are trying to stay on top of everything that's coming in the way of information. And there's so much of it. Like we had a fire, a little brush fire out here along I-9, I think it was last summer. You know, and the Twitter report was, Issaquah is on fire. But there is a little fire in Issaquah, but Issaquah is not on fire. So, you know, you're trying to vet those and then get information back out that's accurate in a timely fashion is a real challenge.
I do want to make one more, on the second bullet there, I want to make one more comment. I've been involved in large-scale events in the business world for several years, and just be aware of people around you anytime you're discussing any of the work that you're doing, because off the record or on the record doesn't mean you're necessarily being interviewed. If you say something and there is a reporter near you and they make note of it, you said it. You're on the record.
Yeah.
So be very aware of your surroundings.
Yep. It's interesting managing, trying to work with media, because media can be your friend if you work with them in the right way and are able to keep the information flowing. If they don't get information, then they start looking for other sources and speculating. You've all seen it on the nightly news. Well, we don't know for sure, but this is what we think. Great, you just told how many millions of people
And
what you
after
think.
every major event, the media is out there looking to find fault with anybody running the organization.
Well, we saw that up at 5:30, you know, this light. It didn't take long for the media to start blame game. Okay. So, a couple of points to remember there. NIMS compliance, ability to work together. So there's some additional things here if you're interested in it. We have IS 100, 200, 700. Yeah, those are all additional training that you can get. These are all online, by the way. So you can go to FEMA's website and take that online training. And we encourage if you want to get involved with the Issaquah Emergency Management, we encourage you to take those courses because it gives you a little bit more in depth than what we've gone over tonight. Okay, we're flying pretty high here. Okay, CERT mobilization and activation. Just a couple of points about that. We're wrapping up the ICS piece here. So CERT self-activate, right? So something happens. What are you going to do?
Take care of myself and my family first.
Okay. Then what might you do? Okay. Good. So we got that. What would be next?
And then if everything's cool there, they can activate. They start on their way to the gathering point. They make note of everything in between.
Good. Okay. So you're going to gather predetermined locations. You can set up your teams when you get there. Most of the meeting locations, and I'm sure Bruce will, I'm not sure if he's covered already or will be covering it, but there's kits for doing registration. So when you show up, if you're not a regular registered volunteer, you can do temporary registration at the gathering locations. Prioritize actions. What's the little catchphrase about actions? Star Wars?
Oh, D2.
Okay, what's that mean?
Plan.
What do you got to know before you do the plan? You got to know what the problem is. Problem, plan, deploy, document. Good, yeah, you got to write it down, right? No disaster is complete without documentation. Unfortunately, some disasters are documentation disasters. We try and avoid that. It's important, actually, it sounds kind of funny, but if you can start your documentation early and often, it makes it a lot easier when things start to get organized in an event, and you can start, you can then recreate what happened and have a good record throughout the event. It's very difficult. People aren't writing things down and try and do it a week or 2 or 3 later when you start getting them done. Okay, report to the local EOC or the incident management team, phone, radio, letter, whatever works. Again, if that's the level that you're involved in, reporting every 60 minutes. And reporting damages. So if you've collected your damages, we want to know what you saw. And we're going to go over the damage report form here in a little bit. But please let us, collect those damages. As Jake mentioned, when you're on your way to the meeting point, you make a note of what you see, and then get that into us so that we can triage what's going on. There's another thing that you can be involved with, which is the Rapid Impact Survey System. We have a little map back there that, John? Okay, right behind John here, there's a little red map. And that divides the city up into 14 different zones. So during an event, we have teams that go through those zones. There's routes designated through them, and record their observations on damages. So that's our Rapid Impact Survey System. We have quite a few CERTs that are trained in that, which is great, because if it's during the day and we have staff here, some staff can do that. But if it's after hours and nobody's around, you guys are here, live in the community, and you can start that, and by the time we get the incident management team up and running, you'll already have information for us. So, something to think about as well. Okay, documentation. Really fun part of this class. Love this. Let's see. So, I won't mention the name of which particular event this was, but then they do what's under incident command. It's very helpful. And there's other helps that you can have. Bruce has a bunch of forms he's going to hand out tonight, and those will kind of just help you, prompt you with some of the things that you can do to collect information and help organize the situation. Here we go. All right. I'm about done, Bruce. So I'm going to cover this real quick. Are you?
Yeah.
Are you good? Okay. So let me go over this real fast, and then I think we're just about there. So emergency management relationships. I mentioned earlier, as a CERT, you can kind of be anywhere you want to be in that continuum of I'm here to find out how to be more prepared, to I want to jump in and get involved in everything I can, and anything in between. So, big blue here is the city of Issaquah, and there's a number of other organizations that are affiliated with the city of Issaquah. We have, of course, Citizen Corps. Citizen Corps has there's CERT program is under Citizen Corps, also the Medical Reserve Corps, and there's several other pieces. Some are more active than others under ICC. Bruce is a member of the Issaquah Citizen Corps. ICAS, which is our incident, too much incident tonight, our Issaquah Communications Support Team. And so these are ham radio operators of the really techie type. And they're very good at what they do, and they're really kind of a lot of fun because they've got some pretty cool communications equipment out there now, and it's amazing what these guys do with comm stuff. So that's an opportunity. You could be a member of ICAS if you want. Eastside Fire and Rescue. I'm not sure what the current status on their service support volunteers are. Are you up to speed on that, Bruce?
Well, the last time we chatted with them is if you sign up to be a service support volunteer, your first responsibility is to them. And those of us who trained you to be CERTs, we don't want to give you up that way. So if you sign up to help the fire department, you are obligated under, they have a contract that you sign. And you're obligated to see them first. So,
So there you go.
yeah, going through that a couple of times, folks didn't care for that. I mean, to sign this contract and all that business, I mean, we're volunteers.
Yeah. You gonna do the ink blot thing? Yes.
The service support volunteers are truly oriented towards the communications support of the Issaquah Fire and Rescue operations. They have a comm van and stuff, so that was not the original intention, but that's what it turned into.
So anyway, it is available to you. Issaquah Fire and Rescue has a number of volunteer opportunities. That's one of them. And yeah, you're right. I think they have quite a few requirements if you want to be an SSV. There's lots of other general volunteering things that are available out there for you. I put all of this up here really to say that as a CERT, you can be involved in any or all of these. If you choose to be involved in all of them, the only thing that you have to remember is to play by the rules of the particular group that you're with at the particular time. Okay? So, you know, if you're part of ICAST, you know that they've got their set how they operate, and that might be different than one of the other groups. So if you're volunteering as a CERT response, then you're going to be, and you're with the city, then you're going to be under how the city emergency management does things. So it's just a reminder to keep that in mind. But we kind of encourage you to get involved in as much as you want. We would like to have you available in CERTs, but it's not an obligation. It's just an opportunity to serve. So there we may have an event come up, and you may get calls from every group you belong to saying, please report. And we just would say, we'd love to have you, but that's your call where you go. Yeah.
How do people up in the Klahani neighborhood fit in since they're annexed?
Since they are not annexed?
Or not annexed, or whatever you want to call it at this point?
Well, currently they're in King County, and we have some of our zones that are fairly close. I'm not sure if you guys are incorporating them into the Issaquah Highlands area zone.
Yeah, like zone 10 or 11, whatever that. Because we do have some of the folks that do live in Klahani, but not a lot, so they affiliate with the Highlands group.
Yeah. And we have people in south of town, out in the Miramont area, Fort Lakes. What is it, Fort Cox? 3 lakes, 2.5 lakes. South of town, Twin Lakes. We have people from other areas up in Sammamish, inside the city of Sammamish, that have been through our particular CERT classes. Although Sammamish has a good CERT program as well, and we work very closely with Sammamish's CERT program. So, but you know, if you're out in unincorporated King County and you're not kind of in no man's land and you want to play with us, we'd love to have you. So, that's kind of how that particular piece works.
We go east along I-90 is almost as far as Crescent, people involved, because they're kind of no man's land. They're probably technically part of Fall City or something, but they're never going to get there, so they're affiliated with this.
Depends on the grid, because the whole Crescent, our Crescent area is Issaquah School District, so.
Yeah.
We'll get it done.
It's really up to the individual. Who do you want to? If you want to affiliate with somebody, who do you want to affiliate with? We're happy to have the help, and volunteers are. It's great. It's great having help. Did a lot of great work. Did a lot of great work up at the 530 slide. CERTs pretty much ran the personal property reunification center. So, boy, that went on for months. So really good deal. There we go. Break. But in this particular case, I think it was the end. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.